My Grandiose Delusions. Narrations of a Mind So Grand. The Sobarzo Dossier. Subject: Luis Enrique Sobarzo. Case type: civil rights/PREA violation/internal cover-up. Prologue. To be or not to be? To be or not to be? That is the question. But is it? Is it even a question anymore? In the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, MCSO, where the walls are lined with decades of federal lawsuits, where the taxpayers have paid out millions in settlements for human rights violations, and where the Department of Justice has had to install federal monitors just to keep the lights on, is the existence of corruption really a question? Or is it a proven, breathing fact that we have simply grown too tired to look at? You are the jury. You are the judge. I am simply the smoking gun. Why was Rodney King a headline and I am a ghost? Why did the world stop for him but walked right past me? Is it because my beating wasn't brutal enough? No. A broken spine, 7 electrical burns, and a sexual battery is brutality enough for any lifetime. It is because Rodney King was a visual accident. I am an administrative masterpiece. I did not receive the headlines because I was buried under something far heavier than a baton. I was buried under the architecture of the cover-up. I am the case that proves they learned from their mistakes. They learned that you don't beat a man in the street where the cameras are. You beat him in the isolation cell where the server controls the footage. They learned that you don't deny the event, you reclassify it. You turn a federal crime into a human resources issue. You turn a torture session into a medical refusal. They deliberately, covertly, and surgically covered themselves up because they realized they had made the biggest mistake in the history of their system. They did it to a practitioner. They did it to a man who knows the protocols better than they do. They did it to a man who kept the receipts. I am leading you into temptation. I am asking you to look at the forbidden fruit of their internal files. Because once you take a bite of the truth, you can never look at the badge the same way again. Here is a taste of the reality they tried to call a delusion. The snippets of reality, the algorithm of pain. The lie. Officer Dunst wrote a report stating he used a single drive stun on my back. The reality. My body bore the scars of 7 distinct burns and laser burns on my retinas. The question: how does one trigger pull create 7 wounds? It doesn't, unless the report is a lie. The ghost officer. The lie. Officer Torre Terrell, the man who instigated the violence, resigned on December 2nd, 2022. He was rehired on January 30th, 2023. The reality. He quit the force for 8 weeks, just long enough to break the chain of the internal investigation, and then walked right back into his job. The question: since when does a law enforcement agency let a suspect quit and return just in time to dodge the heat? The federal dodge. The lie. On October 17th, 2022, 3 high-ranking supervisors sent emails discussing my claim of sexual battery. The reality. They explicitly chose not to open a PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act, investigation. They downgraded it to a Code of Conduct review about rude language. The question: why were they so afraid of the federal investigation that they changed the paperwork to say rude? This is not a story about if it happened. To be or not to be is a question for a man who is unsure of his existence. I am sure. The evidence is sure. The scars are sure. So the question is not, did they do it? The question is, now that you know, what are you going to do about it? Welcome to the Grandiose Delusion. Court is now in session. Volume 1, The Incident. Chapter 1, Descent into Delusions. The definition of madness. They call them delusions not because they are false, but because they are inconvenient. It is a sterile, clinical word designed to strip a man of his credibility before he even opens his mouth. When a man speaks of a reality that defies the comfortable, manicured logic of the protected class, when he speaks of shadows that bite, of authorities that laugh while they break bone, of a system that feeds on the innocent, he is labeled unwell. It is the ultimate gaslight. It is a convenient diagnosis for a world that refuses to look at its own reflection in the mirror. But let me be clear. This is not a story of madness. This is a forensic accounting of a mind so grand, so fortified by the absolute certainty of what it witnessed, that it refused to shatter. This is the story of how I descended into a hell that was physically, undeniably real, only to return to a world that treated me like a ghost. 2. The Salt and the Sovereign, the Practitioner. To understand the velocity of the fall, you must understand the dizzying height from which I fell.
Before the descent, my sanity was undisputed. My reality was defined by the open air of the Pacific and the rigid, unforgiving science of the cath lab. I was living in the gas lamp district of San Diego, a mere 100 yards from the water. The salt air was my constant companion. I lived in a world of open windows and sea breeze, where the horizon was always visible. For 20 years, I was a practitioner of preservation. My business was the functionality of the human body, the preservation of quality of life, and the revival of the soul that has grown tired. I lived in the race against time. My specialty lay in the understanding that we are granted only minutes, sometimes seconds, before a life crosses the threshold where we can never bring it back. To operate in that window, you must be quick, you must be agile, and you must be strong. We were like a pit crew on a racetrack, operating under a canopy of absolute pressure. Our world was built on protocol, stacked upon protocol. It is a never-ending root system, a massive vine of decision trees. Each criteria leads you down one path, and that path splits into another criteria. If the BP drops, do this. If the rhythm shifts, do that. We had to hold the map of the human anatomy in our minds, navigating that vine instantly to preserve life. I walked with the stride of a man who saves lives for a living. I was a sovereign soul. But there is a specific breed of person in society who cannot abide a man who flies too high. They despise the altitude of a sovereign soul. 3. The first gaslight, the legal trap. The descent began long before the first blow was struck. It began with the law itself. The sentence was 2 days. 2 days to pay for a crime that existed only in the perspective of the police. A misunderstanding twisted by the state into a felony. They had initially sought to bury me under a sentence of 6 years. They dangled the threat of prison over my head like a guillotine, waiting for me to flinch. Then, they presented the plea deal like a generous gift wrapped in kindness. Take 2 days or risk 6 years. My interaction with my public defender was the first crack in my reality. She was the very individual sworn to be my shield. I sat across from her, the fluorescent lights humming above us, and I held out my phone. "Look," I said, my voice urgent. "I have the video. I have the digital eye that saw the truth. It proves I didn't do it. She didn't even look at the screen. She looked at her watch. She looked at her paperwork. She refused to submit the video. By refusing to validate my evidence, she forced me into a position where my word was fighting against the weight of the state. She became the first architect of my erasure. I dodged the big sentence by fighting for my own sanity. I made a calculation. I accepted the 2 days. I told myself, I can do 48 hours. I can stand on my head for 48 hours. I viewed this 48-hour sentence not as a punishment, but as a forced pause. A weekend where the universe gave me no choice but to rest. I did not know I was walking into a machine designed to extract my soul. 4. The witness on the bench, the Scottsdale connection. The first time I saw him, we were miles away from the cage where I would eventually break. We were in the holding tank at the Scottsdale City Court. He looked like he belonged on a fairway, not in a cage. He was dressed in the casual uniform of the wealthy, khaki shorts and a crisp button-up shirt. But the image was distorted. He was wrinkled, disheveled, and his shirt was stained with spit-up. He had been drinking, and now the chemicals were leaving his body, taking his dignity with them. He was disintegrating before my eyes. He was shaking violently, the distinct, rhythmic tremor of alcohol withdrawal. He wasn't a criminal. He was a medical crisis in golf clothes. I made it known immediately to the guard station. I tapped on the glass. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady, professional. "I am a medical professional. This man needs help. He is going into DTS." The guard looked up. She didn't see a colleague. She saw an inmate. She ignored me. When they walked me into the isolation cell at MCSO hours later, I froze. There he was again, the same businessman. He was lying on the concrete bench, delirious, muttering to people who weren't there. He was in isolation because he was screaming at ghosts. I was placed in isolation because I was selected. In the thousands of pages of internal affairs documents, IA 2022-0514, there is not a single interview with this man. He was the only neutral party in the room. He watched the entire event from 3 feet away. The MCSO interviewed every officer involved, but they never asked the businessman what he saw. In a homicide investigation, the witness is the key. In an MCSO investigation, the witness is an inconvenience. Chapter 2. The Walk of the Broken One. The Anatomy of Silence. The cell was not silent. It was vibrating with the specific frequency of human suffering. But the silence I am speaking of is not auditory. It is administrative. After the storm of brown suits receded, after the euphoria of their violence had been satisfied, they left me on the concrete. I tried to catalog the damage. As a practitioner, I began the internal triage. My mind reverted to the cath lab decision tree. Ribs fractured. Every breath was a negotiation with sharp, jagged pain. Protocol: stabilize chest wall. I couldn't. Spine compromised. The crushing weight of the knee drop had shifted the architecture of my back. I could feel the misalignment. Protocol: immobilize. I was lying on concrete. Skin burned. The smell of singed hair and cooked flesh from the taser was trapped in the air around me. I looked at the door. I saw the nurses passing by. "I am injured!" I screamed. "My spine is broken. I need imaging." They looked at me. They didn't see a patient. They saw a liability. 2. The logbook lie. The 14-hour gap. In the medical world, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. In the MCSO world, if it is written down, it is likely a lie designed to protect the state. I have the logs. I have the timestamps. They tell a story of a system that knew exactly what it was doing. Evidence file, the statue of apathy. Document, inmate movement history, holding cell 03. Timestamp, October 15th, 2022, at 00:10 a.m., midnight. The entry, being combative, inmate refused medical. The investigator's note, this is the golden shield. By writing, refused medical, 10 minutes after the beating, they absolved themselves of negligence. If I died in that cell from internal bleeding, this log entry would be their defense. We tried, they would say. He refused. But a man screaming for an ambulance is not refusing medical care. He is refusing their care. For 14 hours, I lay on that floor. I was afraid to move. I knew that with a spinal injury, one wrong twist could sever the cord and leave me paralyzed. I urinated on myself because I could not stand. I lay in my own filth, shivering, waiting for a mercy that never came. Then, the camera needed a prop. Evidence file, the fake compassion. Document, inmate movement history, holding cell 03. Timestamp, October 15th, 2022, at 13:42 p.m., 1:42 p.m. The entry, inmate was provided with a mattress and blanket. The investigator's note, look at the time gap, 14 hours. They left a man with broken ribs on concrete for 14 hours. When they finally brought the mattress, it wasn't for comfort. It was to create a log entry that looked humane for the next shift. It was a lie made of foam. 3. The photographic lie, malicious compliance. Officer Shore, that is the name on the report. He was the system administrator. He was the man sent to document the aftermath. He entered my cell with a camera. This should have been the moment of truth. This should have been the moment the bruises, the swelling, and the burns were immortalized. But the camera is a weapon. It depends on who is holding it. My wrists were swollen purple. The cuffs had been ratcheted so tight during the swarm that they had crushed the soft tissue. My thumbs were useless, hanging limp where the ligaments had been torn. Officer Shore raised the camera. He looked at my wrist, and he focused the lens 3 inches higher. He took a crystal clear, high-definition photograph of my forearm. He took a picture of the unblemished skin, carefully cropping out the purple swelling just below it. He moved to my back. He saw the 7 distinct burn marks from the taser, the constellation of torture. He shifted the angle. He took a picture of the shadows. This is called malicious compliance. He followed the order. Take photos of the inmate, but he executed it with the specific intent to capture nothing. He built an archive of irrelevance. He created a file full of evidence that proved I was fine, simply by refusing to look at where I was broken. 4. The fingerprint torture. When the 48 hours were up, they didn't help me to the door. They dragged me to the machine. Fingerprints, the officer said. I looked at him. My hands are broken, I said. My thumbs are snapped. He didn't care. He grabbed my left hand. He grabbed the thumb that was swollen to twice its size, and he pressed. He ground the broken bone against the glass scanner. White-hot electricity shot up my arm. My vision blurred. I ground my teeth so hard I thought they would crack. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a bureaucrat who knows he can hurt you without leaving a mark. He wanted me to pull away. He wanted me to resist so he could throw me back in the cell. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I took the pain. I let him grind my bones because I knew it was the price of my freedom. 5. The race for evidence. They released me at night. They opened the heavy steel door and pushed me out into the cold October air of Phoenix. I was limping. My back was screaming. I was covered in my own dried urine and sweat. "You better run," they said. "Property closes in 10 minutes." It was their final game. If I missed the window to get my property, I would be stranded on the street with no phone, no wallet, and no keys. So I ran. I dragged my dead leg across the pavement. I gasped for air through my broken ribs. I made it to the property window with seconds to spare. The officer handed me my backpack, my lifeline, but it was hog-tied. They had used thick industrial zip ties to bind the zippers shut. They had wrapped it so tight that it was a solid brick of plastic. I looked at my hands, my useless, broken claws. "Please," I said to the officer behind the glass. "I can't open this. Can you cut it?" He looked at my hands. He looked at the bag. He laughed, and he slammed the window shut. I stood there in the dark, holding my own life hostage. But I had my phone. I had my voice. And most importantly, I had the memory of everything they thought I would forget. Chapter 3. The Sanctuary of Silence. 1. The data entry. The triage trap. I walked out of the jail and into the hospital, believing I was crossing a border. I believed I was leaving the territory of the brown suits, the brute force of the state, and entering the territory of the white coats, my territory. I expected the pit crew. Instead, I got the data entry clerks. It wasn't that they were malicious. They weren't angry. They were simply uninterested. I stood at the registration window, a man broken in half. The staff looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. They didn't want to hear the story. They didn't want the context. When I tried to explain the mechanism of injury, the swarm, the knee drop, the sexual battery, they cut me off. "You can tell the doctor that," the clerk said, waving a hand. "Just give me the basics." They didn't want the truth. They wanted the keyword. They needed a code to type into the system so they could go back to their phones. "Where is the pain?" "My wrist," I said. "My back." "But it's because wrist and back," she typed. In that moment, she sealed my fate. In the emergency room, there is a hierarchy of survival. We call it triage levels 1 through 5. Level 1, resuscitation. Code blue, dying now. Level 2, emergent. Stroke, heart attack, major trauma. Level 3, urgent. Stable but serious. Level 4, fast track. Non-critical, sprains. Level 5, non-urgent. The Band-Aid patient. By typing wrist pain and ignoring the sexual assault and the spinal crush, she labeled me a Level 4 fast-track candidate. She tagged me as a walking wounded patient who could wait. She stripped the crime of its context, because context requires typing. 2. The diagnosis of the ghost, what they ignored. Because they refused to listen, they refused to document the true toll of the beating. I am a scholar of the anatomy, and my body tells me the diagnosis every waking second. I live at a constant pain level 7 out of 10. These are not delusions. These are the clinical markers of a spine that has been crushed, which the hospital chose to ignore. Sciatica. The electric fire running down my legs, a constant burning reminder of the nerve compression. Peripheral neuropathy. The numbness in my fingertips and feet, as if my connection to the world is slowly fading. Saddle anesthesia. For the first year and a half, I suffered from urinary incontinence and weakness. The humiliation of losing control of one's own functions is a torture all its own. Erectile dysfunction. For 3 years, I was a man castrated by trauma. I had no erections. I was numb. They treated me for a sprain while I was carrying the wreckage of a catastrophe. 3. The hallway of shame. Because I was labeled a fast-track patient, I didn't get a room. I didn't get privacy. They sent me to the waiting room. I sat there for 2 hours, surrounded by the coughing and the sick, holding my broken ribs, waiting for a name that wouldn't be called. When they finally came for me, they didn't take me to a trauma bay. They brought out a gurney, a transport cart with a mattress as thin as cardboard, and parked it in the hallway, right in the lobby area. They laid me out in front of everyone. I was a spectacle, a man claiming sexual battery and torture, lying on a cart in the middle of a public thoroughfare. 4. The scope of apathy. Finally, the provider arrived. It wasn't a doctor. It was a physician's assistant. This confirmed my fears. PAs are excellent at what they do, but in this setting, they are assigned to the fast track, the level 4s and 5s. She walked in holding a chart that said, wrist pain. She was expecting a 10-minute interaction. Check the wrist, order an X-ray, dispense ibuprofen, discharge. Instead, I gave her a level 2 reality. I need a detective, I told her. I was sexually assaulted. I have fractures in my thoracic spine. I was tortured. I watched her face. It wasn't confusion. It was refusal. My story exceeded her scope. Not her medical scope, but her effort scope. To treat me properly, she would have to admit the triage was wrong. She would have to upgrade me to a trauma patient. She would have to find me a private room. She would have to call the police. She would have to start a sexual assault forensic exam. It was too much work. She decided to treat the chart, not the patient. She ordered X-rays, but because she wasn't listening, she ordered the wrong ones. She ordered a hand X-ray. She ordered a lower back X-ray. My injury was in the upper back. The images came back negative because she took pictures of the wrong bones. She missed the crush injury completely because she refused to look where I pointed. 5. The preemptive strike. I want an investigator, I demanded again. I want a sexual assault kit. She looked at me, cold and annoyed. No, she said. I will not provide those services. You can leave. I pulled out my phone. I hit record. I captured her refusal. I have the audio of a medical professional telling a victim of sexual battery that she would not help him and that he could walk out. Then, I made a tactical move. I told her the truth. "I am going to complain to the house supervisor," I said. "I am going to report you for negligence. I am claiming an EMTALA violation." I saw the shift in her eyes. I had warned her. She didn't apologize. She went into damage control. She walked away, not to help me, but to get to the supervisor first. She went to the nurse and the nursing supervisor and spun the narrative. She told them I was the one refusing care. She told them I was the difficult one. She doctored the narrative before I could even get out of the chair. I eventually spoke to the house supervisor. I told her everything. I told her about the wrong x-rays, the refusal to call the police, the apathy. But just like the jail, the hospital protects its own. The evidence vanished into the ether, leaving me with nothing but a recording on my phone and a body that was still broken. Chapter 4. The Panopticon. 1. The audience of apathy. I often wonder about the faces behind the glass. When the disturbance code was called, I know what happened in the control room. I know the psychology of the screen. In a world addicted to TikTok clips and YouTube shorts, we are trained to watch tragedy as content. When my struggle hit their monitors, I ceased to be a father, a son, or a medical professional. I became a pixelated character in a grainy drama. I picture them sipping stale coffee, leaning in, not to help, but to watch. It became gladiator school. They weren't cheering, and they weren't crying. It was something worse. They were bored. They were gossiping about their Tuesday shifts, while a man's spine was being dismantled on the monitor. The silence of those 100 watchers is more violent than the noise of the beating. They saw a body, but they refused to see a man.
2. The tag, the nurse's suggestion. The trap was set before I ever saw a badge. It started with the white coat. In the intake sector, control is the only currency. I met the intake nurse. She was burnt out, her patience eroded by years of processing bodies. I wanted to speed the process up. I told her, "I don't want to state all my medical information. Let's just move past this section." It was a statement of efficiency. To her, it was a challenge. She didn't yell. She didn't call for help. She simply looked at me over the rim of her glasses and made a suggestion that sounded like a curse. "Well, maybe you want to spend some time in solitary." She didn't say, "I am sending you there." She said it like it was a menu option I had unlocked. She tagged me. She marked me as non-compliant, and then she signaled the hunters. 3. The test, the rib poke. The response was immediate. At that moment, the only officer I recognized was Torre Terrell. As I stood there, processing the nurse's threat, Terrell walked past me. He didn't stop. He didn't look me in the eye. But as he passed, I felt a sharp, rigid jab. He poked me in the ribs, hard. I recoiled and looked at him. He kept walking. He acted like nothing had happened. He was invisible, inconspicuous. It was a test. He was checking my density. He was acknowledging the nurse's tag. It was the silent communication of the pack. This is the one. 4. The missing step. Trauma versus video. It is crazy how the mind protects itself. For years, my memory told me they had handcuffed me behind my back. My memory told me they had shoved me violently into the room. But when I finally secured the video, I saw the truth. I was handcuffed in the front. They walked me in gently.
My mind had skipped a step. It had edited out the walk because it was bracing for the horror. It is a phenomenon known to every practitioner of trauma. The brain deletes the setup to focus on the impact. The video proves I wasn't fighting. I was just walking into the slaughter. 5. The mechanics of anatomy, the snap. They laid me flat. I was compliant. I was waiting for them to remove the cuffs. Then came the synchronization. This was not a struggle. It was a procedure. 2 guards, one on the left, one on the right. They each grabbed a wrist. In one swift, coordinated movement, exact and simultaneous, they grabbed my thumbs and snapped them out of place. It happened at the exact same time. Pop. I was horrified. The pain was immediate and sickening. It wasn't the pain of a bruise. It was the pain of structural failure. They had disabled my hands instantly. 6. The green light, the laser torture. Then the world narrowed down to my face. I felt a hand, Terrell's hand, reach for my face. He wasn't trying to restrain me. He was digging. I felt his fingers trying to hook under my eyelid. He was trying to gouge my eye out of the socket. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the crackle. Then came the burning. It wasn't a flash. It was a sustained burn on my cornea. I saw green. A bright, blinding, nausea-inducing green light. Officer Dunst wasn't using the taser to stun my body at that moment. He was using the laser sight to burn my retinas. He was painting my eye with light while Terrell dug into the socket. Then the current followed the light. I felt the electricity hit my hand. Then, as if it was one continuous line of fire, he moved the taser from my hand to my face. I didn't hear words. I didn't hear commands. I only heard the electrical arc. I only saw green. I couldn't breathe. The weight on my back, the fingers in my eye, the fire in my thumbs. It was an orchestrated symphony of pain. 7. The switch, the sergeant, and watching it all was the sergeant. At first glance, he looked harmless. He looked like a little old man. He looked weak, worn down by the years, staring blankly at the fingerprint machine, as if he barely had the mind to operate it. I was wrong. When the violence started, the little old man vanished. The sergeant looked up, and his face transformed. The weakness evaporated. His eyes changed. His lips curled into a snarl. He turned into an evil beast. He stepped into my personal space and started screaming obscenities, spitting on my face as he yelled, "You think you're tough? You're a bitch." He was feeding off Terrell's energy. Terrell had identified the prey, and the sergeant, this weak old man, suddenly felt young again because he had permission to be a monster.
Chapter 5. The Architecture of Erasure. 1. The Voice of the Detective. The Shattering. For months I called them. I called the Professional Standards Bureau. I called the detectives. I needed them to validate my reality, because the world around me was acting like nothing had happened. I recorded the calls. My paranoia was my only protection. I made them repeat it. "Yes, Mr. Sobarzo, we are looking into everything. We see the assault. We are investigating the sexual battery allegation." They assured me. They placated me. They told me I could trust them. But then came the phone call that nearly destroyed me. It was a female detective. I was recounting the story, telling her exactly what I felt. The weight of the officers, the crush of the knee,
and my hands being twisted behind my back. She stopped me. "Mr. Sobarzo," she said, her voice flat and clinical. "Your hands were not behind you. They were in front of you." The world stopped. My reality shattered. For 2 years, I had felt the phantom sensation of my wrists being crushed behind my lumbar. I had built my defense on that memory. If I was wrong about the handcuffs, what else was I wrong about? 2. The monster in the mirror. That night, terror set in. Not fear of the police, but fear of myself. If my memory was a lie, then who was the villain? I started to pray to God, sweat pouring down my face. "Please, God, don't let the video show me fighting. Don't let it show me kicking. Don't let it show me being the monster they say I am." I was terrified that my mind had hallucinated my innocence. I was terrified that the Grandiose Delusion was real, and that I was actually a violent aggressor who had invented a victimhood to survive the guilt. The detectives knew this. They knew that if they pointed out one flaw in my memory, the whole structure would collapse. They used the handcuff glitch to make everything else, the sexual battery, the laser, the torture, feel like a figment of my imagination. 3. The betrayal of the mind. When I finally held the video files in my hand 2 years later, I was shaking. I didn't want to press play. I was afraid I was about to watch a movie where I was the villain. I pressed play. I saw the officers. I saw the swarm. I saw the torture. And I saw my hands in front of me. It was the most horrifying, frightening feeling I have ever experienced. The video proved I was innocent. It proved I was tortured. But it also proved that my mind had lied to me. The trauma had severed the connection between my eyes and my memory. This is a documented medical phenomenon. When the amygdala, the fear center, is overwhelmed, it short-circuits the hippocampus, the memory recorder. The brain stops recording the sequence and only records the feeling. I felt restrained. I felt helpless. My brain filled in the visual gap with hands behind back, because that is what restraint feels like. 4. The federal dodge, the final insult. While my mind was fractured, their cover-up was solidifying. I have secured the email chain between Lieutenant York and Lieutenant Johns. They had a choice. Option A, open a PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act, packet. This triggers federal oversight. Option B, open a PIR, preliminary inquiry. This is an internal HR review about rude language. The email. A PIR for all the claims will be sufficient, with some notation that the area described was not the inmate's genitals. The verdict. They chose option B. They administratively moved the assault from my genitals to my upper thigh using a keyboard. They deleted the sexual battery to save the badge. 5. The expiration date. The trap. And then came the final blow. 2 years. The statute of limitations for assault in this context is 2 years. By distracting me with the investigation into the comment, by dragging out the inquiry into the language, they ran out the clock on the violence. It was a legal ambush. They didn't beat me with a baton this time. They beat me with a calendar. Because the assault was never formally entered as the primary complaint, I could not appeal it. If they had investigated the assault and found no wrongdoing, I could have fought that. But by ignoring it, They made it disappear. I have proven the injury, the 7 burns. I have proven the setup, the nurse and the solitary threat. I have proven the torture, the green laser and the thumb snap. I have proven the cover-up, the resignation, the email, and the clock. Volume 1 was about how they broke my body. Volume 2 is about how I break their system.
Teaser, Volume 2, The Cover-Up. Introduction, The Rabbit Hole of Reality 1, The Audit of the Soul. Who are you if you cannot trust your own memory? After the realization that my mind had edited the handcuff scene, I plunged into a darkness that had no bottom. If I could hallucinate the position of my hands during a torture session, could I hallucinate my career, my conversations, my life? The system had gaslit me so effectively that I began to question the architecture of my own existence. I stopped looking at the case. I started looking at me. I dove into the rabbit hole. For the last 10 years, I have been a streamer. Since 2015, I have documented my life on video. Thousands of hours of footage. I began to watch it all. I wasn't watching for entertainment. I was watching for sanity. I sat in the dark, eyes glued to the screen, auditing my own life. Did I really say that? Yes, it's on video. Did I really do that job? Yes, it's on video. Am I a violent person? No. Look at the footage. I am kind. I am a practitioner. I am a father. 2. The verification of the sovereign. I reviewed 10 years of history to prove to myself that I was not crazy. I had to rebuild my identity frame by frame. This was the psychological damage that doesn't appear on an X-ray. The MCSO broke my ribs, and those healed in 6 weeks. But when they made me doubt my reality, they broke something that took years to fix. They wanted me to believe that the sexual battery was a delusion. They wanted me to believe the green laser was a dream. They wanted me to believe that I was the problem. But I have the videos, and what I found in the rabbit hole was not a madman. I found a witness. I found a man who has been recording the truth for a decade. And now, I am going to use that truth to burn their lie to the ground. The sanity check is over. The investigation begins.